Now we're going to talk about execution procedure of for loops. So this is a blast from the past. Like, hey, for loops, I've done this so many times, I understand that. Great. Well, there's one little caveat that we haven't really talked about. How does a for loop actually go through the elements in such a simple statement? There's a lot that actually happens behind the scenes. So today we're going to try to get a little behind the scenes of what happens in a for loop. So the main topic with that is, remember I said the first thing what we do is we evaluate the expression. Okay, it must be an iterable value. And I said, I just briefly kind of glazed over this. But today we're going to figure out what exactly is an iterable value. So, when we're talking about iterable values, we're basically talking about two types of things, iterators and iterables. And iterators and iterables on a high level work together to go through sequences element by element. So basically they build functionality of the for loop. And there's some terminology to know. So the main terminology to know is the difference between an iterator and an iterable. An iterator is a mutable object that tracks positions in a sequence. An iterable represents the sequence as a whole. So this might seem very abstract, so I think a very good analogy for this is a book, actually. So the iterable represents the entire book. Like, it's the entire whole thing. Like, you can flip through the book, you can get to anywhere you want. That's the iterable. That's basically the sequence. But an iterator is a particular, it holds the position of the book. And what's a good thing for holding positions of books? Bookmarks. So you can, if this helps, you can think of the iterable as an entire book and an iterator as a bookmark. And I'm actually going to go to this analogy a lot because I think it helps clear things up, because it is a little abstract at first. But I'm also going to get a little more abstract before I actually go into some specific examples, so bear with me. But basically, what we can do, because iterators and iterables are objects, we can implement them using classes. Okay? But how do we implement them? Well, the iterators is basically, for something to be an iterator, it has to have this method called next. And what next does is it just returns the next element, or whatever the current element is. Okay? And then it moves on into the next. So it's like this bookmark is going to the next page. That's how you can think of the next method. Okay? And I'll show you an example of that. And iterables basically have to implement the iter method. So these are two ideas. So we have to basically implement two classes, and they each have to have these two methods. All right, so let's look at an example of this, of how this works. So I'm saying basically that it needs to implement the next, it has the next and iter method. So let's see how this works with an actual list. So let's say we have the list 1, 2, 3. And we know from a for loop that we can iterate through the list easily and print every element. And that works perfectly fine. But so now what we're trying to answer is, how does this work behind the scenes? Well, what basically happens is, the first thing that happens is we have to evaluate list and make it an iterable. So it has to be an iterable first. So, oh, actually no, sorry, I misspoke there. What has to happen actually, so let me scratch what I just said there. What we need to do is we need to evaluate list, and this needs to return an iterator. And then the iterator can go through the list and basically do its magic. So let's look at how that works. So to create an iterator, we just use the built-in iter method, which is implemented by the sequence. So if we do this, we get a list iterator. And now once we have this list iterator, we can go through it one by one. So if we do next on, so basically I'm actually going to define this as an iterator, just so it's more succinct. Also, by the way, we can do, so notice that this has the two dashes basically. So just like with the repr example and string examples, you can do list.iter if that pleases you. Although, in my opinion, this first version is a lot more simple. They basically do the same thing. And now what we can do is we can go through the iterators. And so if we do next iterator, what's the first element? 1. And so what the for loop is doing, it's first calling next, it gets 1. And then it's going to call next again. It gets 2. And then it's going to call next again. It gets 3. And then it's going to call next one more time. And now this is an interesting question. What happens? There's nothing left. So when that happens, what you do is you raise something called the stop iteration exception. This is another exception. And we basically raise this and tell the iterator that it's done. Okay, so it can go back to the beginning or just be done with its life, you know. So the stop iteration ends iteration. So that's how, on a high level, that works. But now let's look at a more, I think, a pretty good visualization for how this works. So we have a list, 1, 2, 3, okay, and we want to iterate through it. So the first step is we create an iterator for the iterable object. So remember, the iterable object is the entire list itself. It's the book. So you can think of the list as a book, and each of the elements is a page. So we have to start, when we start reading a book, we have to start at the first page. So we basically create an iterator. So the bookmark's at the first page. Hasn't done anything yet. We've just started reading the book. But now, what we're going to do is we're going to call the next method. So, and we're going to keep on doing this until we basically finish the list. We finish going through the list. Or if in the analogy perspective, we're going to go through until we finish the book. So I'm going to throw in these two together. So just so this, I hope this is very clear. But so what's going to happen is in the first call next, we're going to read the first page. Basically, we're going to read the first element, and then we're going to print it out. And then what happens? Basically, we tell the iterator to go to the next element. And also what we've basically done here is we've read the first element and we've moved on to the next element. So in the book analogy, we've read the first page and we've moved on to the second page. And now the bookmark's at the second page. So this happens in the first call to next. In the second call, the same thing happens basically, and we print out the output is 2. And so this is the second call to next, and now it's at 3. We're going to do it one more time. So we have 3, and then now the point is going to be towards the end, basically towards the end of the list. But it hasn't done anything yet because it had to read 3 off in the previous iteration. So this is the third call to next. And now in the fourth call to next, we're going to get our stop iteration exception because now it's going to realize, hey, I'm done. I'm done with the book, so I can stop. So it goes stop iteration, and we're done. So this is how, basically a visualization of how the iterator works.